was World War II. I got confused. Been a little crazy. Welcome, everyone. We'd like to, steps here, I take my time. We'd like to begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm going to ask Postman's Mate third class, Chuck Klein, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Can you do that, Chuck? Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to say, how many we have here for the first time? Would you raise your hands? Excellent. Thank you very much. For those who are here for the first time, if you'd like to be on our email list, we have a fellow in the lobby who will take care of that. Or if you want to be on the postcard list, we have veterans that don't have email, and we send 220 postcards out every month to announce the meeting and the dinner and all that. So if you have that. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. No one gets paid. Everything comes in here goes to veterans causes. At the end of the year, we'll write a couple $1,000s in checks for veteran causes. So I want you to know that. We don't have dues. We don't have memberships. We have helmet committee. There you are, raising the helmet back there. So when you leave, if you're so inclined, at the doors will be a gentleman with a World War II Army helmet. And if you want to throw a buck or two in there, we would be most appreciative. Where is Doug Riley?
Back here, Charlie.
You're supposed to be sitting up here.
She wanted to sit like it was regular church.
Too late. Too late. Okay. Doug has a in Dillsburg tribute World War II. And it's next week, on the 10th. And I strongly recommend you check with Doug at the lobby. He has an excellent program. They have World War II speakers. They have reenactors, I believe. Hello? Dance band. So it's a full day. But check with Doug. Don't let him leave. It's a wonderful event. I think you'd be very pleased when you're there. Attention Kmart shoppers. Thank you, Cliff. Our speaker tonight is from, I'm missing something here. No, we did the pledge first time. The veterans. Did I ask her how many World War II veterans we have? No, that was hiding from me. How many World War II veterans do we have? I don't know. Would you raise your hand? Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Chuck, you can put your hand down now. I'm glad I didn't miss that. Tonight our speaker is from Bloomsburg, and we have a special treat. He has his display out there of his PT boat experience in South Pacific. And he was brought here by Jack Kraft. Jack is the proprietor of the Endless Mountains World War II Museum in Sonestown or Eaglesmere, close enough. And he actually brought him here and set everything up out there. And he's been coming to our meetings from time to time. And I just want to tell you how much we appreciate what you do for the veterans. Before I get into that, we have a meeting in September. We're going to have Clarence Smoyer here. If you remember back in March, we had a tank come to Harrisburg. Remember that? On the street, big tank. Well, that was Clarence Moyer, and he fought the tank battle in Cologne. Classic battle. And Clarence is going to be here to speak for us in August and share his story with us. So that's something we'd like to let you know about. I don't know if you get. Sorry? September. Sorry, September. I'm trying this phone out for notes the first time, but my eyes don't really pick it up, so forgive me. I think we've got everything covered. Now we'll get to the main thrust, and that is our speaker of the evening. And I'm going to let Barbara do the introduction. Barbara, one of our new directors, and we actually interviewed Charlie in Bloomsburg with our historian Chris. So I'm going to let you introduce Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
Charlie, before you do that, did you want that other clip? Stearman?
I think there was something on the airplane that you wanted to show.
Oh my gosh. You were forgetting something.
Yeah, I know, I want to see this. It's not in here.
Okay.
Oh, I got it. Actually, we have two clips. All right. Pardon the interruption. I'm getting lost here. We had a fellow speak for us 2 years ago. In fact, he was here Pearl Harbor Day, Colonel William Benelli. And we had Dick Schreiner from Allentown. They spoke. And they both went to the Capitol Rotunda, and they were honored by the state of Pennsylvania, and this past year, the governor of Pennsylvania. He actually took all the veterans, the 6 of them, up to his office. I started to get in line, and they gave me the hand. They said, "You're not going." I said, "But I brought the guys." He said, "Yeah, that's nice, Charlie. Wait here." So they got to go to the governor's office. I didn't. I got a clip yesterday, or the day before, from his son. And he said, "Dad, Colonel Benelli was a B-17 pilot and flew out of Fauquier. And he said, I have a clip here. My dad actually got into a plane and flew. And I have it. And I'm sending it to you. And Cliff is going to show us. It's a Stearman. And he flew right seat. Pay attention to Colonel Benelli's face when he gets out of the plane. How's that for a 98-year-old? If you remember, he had a little sour look on his face. He just sort of nodded his head. He wanted to do barrel rolls. The pilot said, "No way." "Oh yeah," he said, "I've done it before, I can do them now. I can do it." "No way." So when he got out, he was upset because he didn't get a chance to do barrel rolls. Quite a man, 98 years old, and flying a Stearman. Jack, I introduced you. Thank you. I wish I had more stuff on this. Now it's back to Barbara. You're going to do a clip?
No.
No clip.
Introduction. We'll leave it all to Charlie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Barbara's presenting.
Hi. It It is a pleasure tonight to introduce my friend Charlie Brooking to you. But before I do, I would like to reiterate what Charlie Lloyd had said and thank his driver, Jack Kraft, who is an avid supporter of World War II history and owns and operates the fabulous museum, Endless Mountains Museum in Sonestown. It's a treasure trove, and I'm serious, of memorabilia, and definitely worth a visit to see that. Both Charlie and Jack attended a meeting earlier today outside of Charles' hometown of Bloomsburg with me, and we celebrated two momentous birthdays of two fellow World War II vets who celebrated their 100th and 102nd birthday. So Charlie has had quite an eventful day, and we are so glad he is here with us tonight to share his own experiences in World War II on board a PT boat. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my friend, Charles Brooking.
Thank you. Can you all hear me all right? Good, good. Seeing that picture of that airplane, I just have to throw this in. I hold a private pilot's license, and I learned how to fly twin-engine airplanes. And one day at our airport, a gentleman came in with one of these twin-engine aircraft. And I looked at it and I said, "Do you mind if I take that up for a run?" And he said, "No." So I took it up. But what I did with that airplane should never have been done with that airplane. All the stunts I pulled with it, and I came back down, and I got out. I said, "Could I take it back up tomorrow?" And he looked at me very sober, and he says, "We value our airplane, and that's the last time you get it." I was on PT boats in the Second World War. Although John Kennedy got all the publicity from it, I never met the gentleman while I was overseas. I was born in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, and in 1927, in April. We weren't a rich family. My father worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and he drew a pay of $27 every 2 weeks. But we didn't know we were poor because we were happy. And my mother was a good baker and canner, and she always saw that we always had something to eat. I tell my grandkids that I can remember going to bed many a night on bread and milk. That's all we had. But the war came, and Bloomsburg was our, I guess you could call it, our kingdom. I knew where Catawissa was. I knew where Berwick was. I knew where Danville was. Danville was 9 miles away. Berwick was 15. Catawissa was about 3 miles. The only reason I knew where they were is because of the North Branch bus. And nobody in those days had an automobile. Now I'm talking back in the 20s, 30s, and early 40s. So I know what it is to have to struggle to survive. Then the war came along, and I wanted to get into the service real bad. My mother wasn't really in favor of it, but my father and I talked her into, when I turned 17, to let me enlist in the service. I wanted to join the Marine Corps, but my father said to me, "Son, do you remember seeing the movies and pictures of the Marines and the Army? Where do they sleep when they're out on maneuvers or during war?" He said they sleep in a foxhole and a lot of times with water. And he said, in the Navy, you've got a dry bunk, usually, and you get 3 square meals a day, usually. So I joined the Navy. And in boot camp, they ask you, what type of ship would you like to be on? I said, a small one. Well, I didn't know whether I was going to get a rowboat or what I was going to get. But they took 121 of us out of the different companies. I went to boot camp in Sampson, New York, at Lake Geneva. And they took 121 of us and sent us to a special unit to test us. They tested us with a lot of embarrassing, very embarrassing questions. They had us stand with our hands straight out. And then after they got done talking to us for about an hour, they said, turn your hands over. And the lieutenant came down the line and he pulled his hand across your hand like that and he said, if you had moisture on your hand, you were out of there. Out of that many, there was 21 of us that was selected for PT boatbuilding. After boot camp, they sent me to Boston, Massachusetts at the Armed Guard Center until all the members of my squadron formed up there. And then they sent me to Melville, Rhode Island for PT boat training. They taught you how to take the guns apart, how to put them back together, and some of them blindfolded. They taught you all the manners of what you had to do on a PT boat, and what you had to learn how to fire all the guns, be able to fire the torpedoes, how to run the engines, and the only thing we didn't have to learn how to do was run the radios, but the radio communications during that period of time was very, very poor. Then when they sent me to Melville, we learned everything there was about PT boats. And the first thing I went in, and they had a PT boat up on dry dock. I looked at that thing and I thought, what have I gotten myself into? It didn't look much bigger than a regular fishing boat, but it was at that time it was 77 foot long, because they built PT boats in 77, 78, and 80 foot boats. So after our training in Melville, they sent us down to Miami, Florida for shakedown. From Miami, we loaded on bigger ships, went through the Panama Canal, and went straight across to the South Pacific. But PT boats were not really new. The first PT boat, PT-1, was commissioned in April 23rd, 1890. But it looked nothing like the PT boats that we have. A lot of the early PT boats had a rod sticking out in front of the boat with a charge in front of it. And what they had to do was get in close enough to the ship to attach that charge to the ship and set it off. And usually when they set it off, they were involved in the crash too. But some of the early Navy PT boats. Now PT boats, I don't know whether you know or not, they were constructed of 3/4 inch mahogany plywood. They took 6 inch, well, first the boats were made upside down. And they took and laid the ribs in place where they should be on the boat. Then they attached 6 inch wide, and there was different lengths of the mahogany plywood. After they covered the whole bottom of the boat, they put glue and airplane canvas on the boat then, and it was ironed on with a hot iron. The glue was and canvas. Then another section of mahogany plywood one section's like this, the other laid on there like that, to take up the stress of being in heavy water. Then the boat was turned over and the superstructure was put in place. And then the guns were added. We had 3 Packard engines, 1,250 horsepower each, and we carried 3,000 gallons of aviation fuel. Each engine at flank speed burned 185 gallons of aviation fuel an hour, each engine. Our maximum range was 550 miles if you were running at flank speed. A lot of times we would run on one engine, which we could, because each engine had its own drive shaft and own propeller, and so you could run on either 1, 2, or all 3 engines. The motor torpedo boat was both the smallest and the fastest of the surface fighting craft to take part in the Second World War, with the advantage of a shallow draft to penetrate minefields and harbor defenses. High speed and maneuverability were to the PT's advantage. After World War II, PT boats were the only thing that they had that was able to battle with the Japanese ships. And those PT boats were over in the Philippine Islands. I'll get into a little more of that a little bit later. The PT boats answered the need for a weapon that could take the war close into enemy coastal waters, specializing in sudden, unexpected attacks on coastal shipping. The little PTs, regardless of their size, wreaked havoc among the larger ships with their tactics and crewed by lively individuals. The PTs took part in some of the most heroic episodes in naval history. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, there were only 29 PT boats in service at that time. Squadron 1 was at Pearl Harbor, and they were credited with bringing down 2 of the Japanese airplanes. And after the attack was over, their services took the injured sailors that they pulled out of the waters or off of other ships and took them to ports where there was a hospital there in Pearl Harbor. And Squadron 1 remained at Pearl Harbor for the next 6 months until they were sent to Midway to help defend that island from the Japanese. Over in the Philippine Islands, Squadron 3 was over there. And like I said, they were the only Navy vessels that could come in contact with the Japanese at that time, because it was such a devastating attack at Pearl Harbor. It's hard to talk about. But hey, in the Philippine Islands, they did as much as they possibly could against the Japanese fleets. When it was determined that the Japanese were going to overrun the Philippine Islands, President Roosevelt demanded that General MacArthur and his staff be taken off of Corregidor and taken south as close to Australia as they could go. Because we knew that the Japanese were going to overrun the Philippines. All the troops in the Philippines were taken to Corregidor. That was the last stand for the Americans in the Philippines. MacArthur was going to leave by submarine. And because of the shallowness of the harbor and the dangers of the Japanese ships, and he took a test ride on one of the PT boats, and he liked what he saw. So it was determined against Roosevelt's stressing to him that he should go by submarine. He went out by PT boat. And the branches of the service that had people that they felt deemed necessary for the armed services were taken out with MacArthur, along with the Queen and a lot of her entourage with the PT boats. It was a 550-mile trip. They made one stop overnight, and it was during rough water. MacArthur, at that time, spent his whole time above ship. The rest of the people were down below, and all of them were deathly seasick, except MacArthur. But we got them down to Mindanao, and from there, when it was deemed safe, they were flown into Australia. And then MacArthur took over the land services for the United States. After Pearl Harbor, the little boats with their mahogany hulls and decks would be all the United States Navy could throw in the way of the powerful Japanese armament. After Squadron 3 took MacArthur from the Corregidor and took him down to Mindanao, and they expended their boats in Mindanao. New Squadron 3 was formed and sent to Tulagi Harbor across Iron Bottom Sound for Guadalcanal. During the first weeks on the invasion of Guadalcanal, it was feared that the United States Marines were going to be pushed back to the sea because the Navy had lost a series of key engagements at Valor Island and Guadalcanal and Iron Bottom Sound. The Japanese had sunk 3 American cruisers, 1 Australian cruiser, 1 heavy cruiser, and about 30 other United States fleet ships. So the American fleet had to withdraw at that time to save what was left of their fleet. Then the Japanese stayed at Iron Bottom Sound and were shelling all the Marine positions on Guadalcanal. Well, enter the PT boats. The newly formed Squadron 3 was sent to Savo Island off of Guadalcanal, and they battled the Japanese fleet there. They sunk the flagship and a couple of the cruisers and damaged some of the smaller ships. And then the Japanese fleet had to withdraw at that point because the PT boats were harassing. They were afraid of our torpedoes because we carried 4 torpedoes. So they withdrew, and then the American Navy and merchant ships were able to get back into harbor and unload more troops, medical supplies, food, and ammunition. And in time, then, the Marines won the battle for Guadalcanal. Now, in all the landings that the Navy had, where they invaded other islands, PT boats were involved. But you never read about the little PT boats. It's all the bigger ships. But PT boats were involved in all the major landings. They took part in all of them. At the Battle of Midway, PT boat squadron run by Lieutenant Clinton McClellan, Jr., while at Pearl Harbor had 3-day notice to go on their own bottom to Midway. That was a journey of 1,385 miles. It was the longest run across open waters made by PTs. The boats were refueled on their way by aircraft and submarines and seaplane tenders. All the boats made it without incident except PT-23. They broke a crankshaft and had to return to Pearl Harbor. Once at Midway, Ron 1 participated in the Battle of Midway. PT boat, well, to tell you what the armament is on a PT boat, we had 4 torpedoes. We had a 37 mm on the bow. We had a 20 mm on the bow. On the stern, we carried usually a 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. Besides that, we had hand grenades, 45 caliber pistols, Thompson machine guns, carbines, sawed-off shotguns, and large knives. And you wonder, well, what would you need a knife for? What would you need the shotguns for? But in the beginning of the war, when the PT boats had sunk a ship and they pulled some of the surviving Japanese up on the ship, they had them up on the bow of the boat and were examining for ammunition and guns and anything else. Several of the Japanese had crawled, now you're only talking probably that much above the water in the back. They had crawled up over the back of the boat and slaughtered several of the PT boatmen. After that, we always made sure we had our knives and our 45s and would stand ready to protect ourselves. We didn't. Eleanor Roosevelt called us butchers of the sea because after that we never picked up a Japanese survivor, except one time. We picked up one Japanese seaman, and in his pocket he had a diary. And in that diary it said the United States Navy had a new weapon. It was a dragon that flapped its wings and fired torpedoes. He was talking about PT boats. So they were kind of scared of the PT boats because of the torpedoes. Our job basically, MacArthur, when he decided that he wanted to get back to the Philippines as fast as he could, he said, we're going to bypass a lot of the small islands that the Japanese attacked or are on. And he said, we're going to bypass them so I can get to the Philippines quickly. So they did. But the Japanese, they tried to sneak down the slot towards Guadalcanal and try to resupply the smaller islands with ammunition, troops, and medical supplies. So our job was to lay back against the islands and the slot, and usually there was about 40 PT boats in a line. And we were on radio silence. That's what happened to Kennedy. I'll tell you about him. The first boat would come to contact, and the Japanese would try to come on down, and our job was to go out and get as close as we could and try to sink them with our torpedoes. But in the beginning of the war, when we fired our torpedoes, 60% of our torpedoes were duds. They were adapted from World War I torpedoes. That was a Mark 8. Then they came out with a Mark 13, which was a better torpedo, and they had better firing pins in them. From then on, we had no problem. Even the submarines had the same problem that we did. The PT boat was extremely dangerous and hazardous, and the boats were always considered expendable by the Navy. We were considered like papers, pencils, paper clips to the Navy. We were expendable because we were only plywood, and we were small. The crew members were trained to fulfill the duties of all members of the PT boats and would receive no hazardous pay of any kind during any of World War II. PTs were in action in all theaters: the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the English Channel, the Caribbean, the Aleutians, and the Pacific. PT boat, just to give you some of the ideas of what the PT boats did. PT boat 34 and 41 engaged the Japanese light cruiser Como and torpedoed boat Kifi off Cape Torred off the island of Cebu in the Philippines. Well, that was down around Guadalcanal. The Kumu was hit by a torpedo but failed to explode. PT-34 is bombed and strafed and is beached. She is destroyed by a second air attack. 2 of her crew were killed and 3 are wounded. December 8th, 1942, 8 PT boats in one to later be commanded by future President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, turned back 8 Japanese destroyers attempting to land reinforcements on Guadalcanal. The following night, PT-59 sinks the Japanese submarine I-3 in the waters surrounding the island. December 12th, 5 PT boats attacked the Japanese destroyer Tsukuyomi, sinking Sing, but PT-41 is also lost. January 11th, 1942, 11 PT boats attacked a Japanese force of 8 destroyers off Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, damaging one of the enemy vessels. PT-112 is sunk and PT-43 is damaged. On May 14th, 1943, PT boat 150 and 152 sank the Japanese submarine RO-182 in New Guinea. Australian second, PT boat 109 on patrol off Calabar in the Solomon Islands is rammed and sunk by the Japanese destroyer. 2 sailors are killed and the boat skipper, John F. Kennedy, and the other survivors swim to a nearby island and are rescued on August 6th. Kennedy later became our 35th President of the United States. Now up in Fall River, Massachusetts, there is a PT boat museum up there. One of the boats I served on, the 617. And if you ever get a chance to go up there and see those boats, PT 659 is up there, and when President Kennedy was elected president, in his inauguration parade, the boat was renumbered 105 and put on a large flatbed barge. And his surviving members of PT 109 were on that PT boat in Kennedy's parade. September 16, 1943, PT 489 and 363 set off through 60 miles of heavily mined waters and repeatedly being fired on by Japanese shore batteries, go into Wasulu Bay, East Indonesia, and pulled fighter pilot Ensign A. Thomas from the waters. The mission in the beginning was deemed suicidal, but they pulled it off. On the 25th, 1943, during the Battle of Surrey Straits, PT boats and destroyers battled Japanese ships by launching torpedoes against the Japanese ships, sinking 4 ships, including the battleship Fuso, damaging 3 others, including the battleship Yamashiro. When the Japanese were run down the San Bernardino Strait, called the Tokyo Express, the PTs were so effective that the action of the PTs and their president alone in the offshore waters at night was sufficient to persuade the enemy supply convoy to turn back and fail to supply their troops on the lower islands. On February 1, 1945, off Talon Point, Luzerne, the USS Cunningham, now get this, DD 371 of the U.S. fleet, and the USS Lowell, DE 586, fired on PT boats 77 and 79 because they thought they were Japanese torpedo boats, or they were Japanese suicide boats. There was no injuries, but there was a whole lot of damage. On several occasions, we had the Australian Navy, the Australian Air Force, and the American aviators from Navy ships and land bases attack quite a few PT boats because they didn't know what they were. Because radio communications at that time were very, very poor, not like they are today. If radio communications then had been like they are today, there would have been no problem. But most of our communication was by semaphore or by flash of light. And what we did then, we painted a huge star on the bow of our boat so that when the planes were flying, of course the ships couldn't see it, they would know that it was an American ship. Rendezvous Harbor was the largest PT base established in the Pacific from which PTs could attack the Tokyo Stress. General MacArthur returned to Corregidor on PT 373 on March 2nd, 1945, nearly 3 years from the day he had left the Rock in PT 41 in March 1942. Now all the pictures, newsreels, and papers, when they showed MacArthur going into the Philippine Islands, it showed him walking off the ramp of a landing barge, probably a Higgins, and wading through the water up to the shore. That was poor publicity. He actually came back in a PT boat. The final, let me see where I am here. There were 25 PT boat squadron in action in the Pacific at the time of Japanese surrender. PT boats were the first Allied craft to enter Manoa Bay since the Americans withdrew in May 1942. The final operation of PT boats in the Pacific was to be Okinawa. Shortly thereafter, hostilities ceased with the Japanese surrender. Now, I was transferred, a new squadron of Elco PT boats was being formed. So I was transferred to PT Boat Squadron 42. And we picked up our squadron in Brooklyn, New York, and took it to Miami, Florida, and was ready to have the boats loaded up and taken overseas because they were going to send 12 squadrons of PT boats into Tokyo Bay. And they were to go around, not with torpedoes, but with guns. 50 caliber guns, 30 caliber guns, anything we could get aboard. And they were to cause a lot of confusion in there before the landing troops were going to go in and invade Japan. But then they'd set off the atomic bomb at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that ended the war. If it would have been for that, and we would have been sent into Tokyo Bay, I probably wouldn't be here today. But thank God, even though it did take a lot of lives, it did save a lot of American lives. Now, it hurts me a lot of times to talk about sinking the Japanese ships and so forth like that. But the way I thought about it at each time, those people aboard, even though they were Japanese and our enemy at that time, They were human beings. Did they deserve to die? Maybe not. But we had to win the war. It really hurt me because I suddenly realized they were somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's father, and husband. But it had to be, it was necessary. PT boatmen killed in action were 331. A plaque in their memory can be seen in the recreation area of Newberry Hall at Fall River, Massachusetts. Killed in action are actually death in combat. Actual deaths, accidental deaths are counted. PT boats took part in D-Day. There was 48 PT boats in D-Day. They were taken in there to keep the airplanes away, keep the submarines away. We sunk one submarine, and to battle with the German E-boats. And we were very effective in that way because we had to keep them away from the landing barges and the troop ships that were there. Out of the 48 PT boats that were there, we lost 10 boats and 8 crews. PT 199 on D-Day had a full admiral on board of its PT boat. Now, to give you some of the details to make you realize a little bit of what the cost is of war. In the attack on Pearl Harbor, 2,403 Americans were killed. Another 178 were wounded. 18 ships were sunk or seriously damaged. 347 planes were destroyed or damaged. At 8:06 a.m., a bomb struck the forward magazine of the Arizona and setting off a shock wave that was felt by planes 10,000 feet above. On the Arizona alone, 1,177 sailors and Marines were lost, and a lot of those are still in the ruins. In World War II, 10 million men between the ages of 19 and 45 years of age served in the armed services. The Battle of Okinawa claimed 12,281 American dead, 94,239 missing, and 36,631 wounded. 94,000 civilians died, and 94,136 Japanese were killed. Got to put on my cheers. The Battle of Okinawa, well, I didn't go over that. April 30th, 2019 marked the 44th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. That war claimed 58,000 American lives and 150,000 wounded and some 1,600 missing in action. In World War I, 53,513 were killed. 2,004 and 2 were wounded. In World War II, 293,121 died. 846 were wounded. The Korean War claimed 33,000 lives, 739 were wounded. No, 103,284 were wounded. In the Vietnam War, we lost 47,434 died, and 153,303 were wounded. In the Persian Gulf War, 1990, 148 were killed and 46 wounded. In the Iraq War, 203 to 211, 3,519 died, 32,246 were wounded. In the Afghan War, so far, 201 to 2016, 1,854 died and 20,154 were wounded. Now, still unaccounted for, World War II, there's still 73,137 still unaccounted for. The Korean War, there's still 7,807 unaccounted for. The Vietnam War, 1,618. In the Gulf War, 126. So that gives you an idea of how many American lives have been sacrificed in war. It's something that has to be done, but what we've got to do is to keep future wars from being prevented. Although we will never be the first to fire the first shot. One thing, I don't know whether it's appropriate time, but being in church here, I'm a firm believer of prayer. If it wasn't for prayer, I would have remained an alcoholic. When I came out of the service, I was a bad alcoholic. Well, I was going with my wife, or my girlfriend at that time. We were engaged 5 times. And each time, our breakup occurred because of my drinking. I was supposed to be working one night, and I went to the movies with another girl, even though I was supposed to be engaged to my wife. And I went to the movies and took another girl, and who should come in 3 rows behind me but my future wife and her girlfriend. I didn't know they were there. But I was renting a room. Her mother had a room to rent. And I thought, well, that'd be neat. So I rented a room there. And I was supposed to be coming home from work about 7:30 the next morning. Well, I didn't drive. I didn't have a car at that time, but my buddy did. And he pulled in front of the house where I was living. And on this porch was my suitcase and an engagement ring sitting right on top of the suitcase. I said to Virgil, I said, uh-oh, it looks like I've been thrown out. So we loaded everything up in the car and went to Bridgeport, Connecticut. I worked for Transflight Aircraft up there building jets on final wing assembly. Then they decided they wanted to move to Texas, and they didn't want to go to Texas. So I went to California, where my parents had moved in the beginning of 1947, because my sister married a gentleman from out there, and they had a little baby. But anyway, I went out to California on a Greyhound bus. And I met a girl on the way going out there. And while I was going out there, we got into Oakland, California, where I was supposed to get off. And she said to me, she said, hey, she said, let's go into San Francisco and get a room, get a hotel. I go, oh. So that's what we did. I went into San Francisco. And then we stayed there 4 days with a bathtub full of beer and ice. And after 4 days, my money was running short. and the beer was running out, so did the girl. So I had just enough money to go back to across the bay to Oakland and then into Alameda, which is right next to Oakland, to my parents' address. And the taxi driver dropped me off, and I must have been terrible looking because my hair was long, I hadn't shaved, and I hadn't taken a bath. Who can take a bath with a bathtub full of beer? But anyway, I knocked on the door, and my mother answered the door. And she said to me, "Yes, can I help you?" I said, "Mom, it's me, Charles." Well, that must have been a scurvy looking thing. And she started to cry, and we went in the living room, and we sat in there, or stood in there in the living room, cried. And at that time, I kid you not, I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and I heard a voice tell me, "You need help." I looked around and there was nobody there. Nobody at all. And I told my mother, I said, "Mom, I need to quit drinking. I need to turn my life around." She said, "Well, I'm going to the doctor for my nerves." And I knew why her nerves were bad because of my drinking and my brother's drinking. But he quit about the same time I did. But anyway, so I went to this doctor. This is the part I want to stress to you. And my mother gave me money to get a haircut. I got shaved, I got decent clothes. And I went to this doctor, and he says, "Sit down." So I sat down, and he pulled a chair up, and he reached over, and he took me by the hand. He said, "Son," he said, "there is no magic cure that I can give you to stop you from drinking." He said, "There's no magic pill I could give you." But he said, "I know what can help you." And I said, "Anything. What is it?" He said, "The power of prayer." Now this is a medical profession. He was still holding my hand, and he prayed with me for about 15, 20 minutes. And he said, "Now tomorrow I'm going to see you again." So I went back the next day, and it was the same thing. He said, "Son, there's no magic cure for you. You have got to want it. You have got to want your body pure." So he sat down again, and he prayed with me, holding my hand. He said, "Now I'll see you one more time tomorrow." So I went back on the third day, and it was the same thing. And he prayed with me again. He said, "Now I don't want to see you back here again. But he said, if you need me, I'm here for you." So I left his office, and I never drank, and I never smoked again. He told me before I left, he said, "If you go into a bar, tell the bartender what you're trying to do, and he'll set a glass of 7-Up or ginger ale in front of you with an orange peel or an olive in it, and they won't know what you're drinking." And he said, "Any friends that you meet, if they try to get you to drink, find new friends." So I did. After 6 months, I couldn't forget this girl back in Pennsylvania. Every place I went, I could see her, and I would think about her day and night. So I sat down and I wrote Dot. I said, "Honey," I said, "I quit drinking, I quit smoking. Do you want to get engaged for the 6th time?" I said, "I'll come back and we'll get married." So I left on the Greyhound bus. She wrote back and said yes. I got on the Greyhound bus on Monday. Friday I pulled into Bloomsburg on Main Street at the Greyhound bus terminal, which was Hotel McGee at that time. And there standing on the sidewalk was Dot. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got off, got my suitcases off, and I gave her a hug and a kiss, and I said, "Honey," I said, "how do you know I was going to be on that bus?" She said, "I've been meeting every bus for 2 days." So we went up, and her mother wasn't well pleased with me because she remembered how I used to be. And I sat down, I talked to her, and she agreed. I said, I want to marry your daughter. So my wife and I got married the following Friday, and we were married 70 years, 5 months, and 2 days.
What does PT stand for?
What does PT stand for, Charlie?
Patrol torpedo,
Okay.
or plenty tough.
Might be prejudiced, yes. How big is the crew on a PT boat? How large is the crew?
How many? We had 9 men and 2 officers, but we all dressed alike. We never stood inspection.
What was your duty level?
Pardon?
What was your duty level on the PT boat? What did you
What was
do?
my duty? I was a gunner's mate, twin caliber 50 machine guns. Twin 50s. That's what's going on in my hearing today.
How did you aim? How did you aim something those twin 50s were they? I'm saying, how were you able to aim those twin 50s?
How do you aim them? You don't aim them. Every 5th round is a tracer.
Gotcha.
So you pull in, say you're firing at a plane. You pull your barrels down and aim it towards the airplane and start shooting. Your tracers go out, and it's real easy to burn your tracers and your ammunition, your shells right in on the airplane.
That's better than aiming. That's great.
Over here we have a question.
Right here, Charlie.
Okay.
Have him, sir. Speak.
I think I know the answer, but what about toilet facilities on a PT boat?
What are the toilet facilities? Did you ever have a head toilet?
Don't breathe from that. A choice?
I had to say quietly, we're in church.
For those of you that I handed out little brochures out there, there's a little story in there on them. Because our head was right up in the point of the boat on the left-hand side. Just enough to sit on the toilet, and there was a little wash bowl there. And during some rough weather, when we would go up over huge waves, bounce down, go through the next one, up over, and so forth. And he was in there sitting on the toilet when the boat went down. He flipped completely around, hit his head on the wash bowl, and put his foot through. We had aluminum, real thin aluminum deck plates. Put his right through that and stuck his leg. He come crawling out, and I was in my bunk with the straps across. We weren't in a war zone at that time. And when I unfastened my straps, I bounced out, I hit the table and landed right next to him. As the boat was about ready to go back up and he was about ready to slide down, I grabbed a hold of the bulkhead, wrapped my feet around him, and found out what was wrong with him. And I hit the panic button and got some other people down there to help me. And we put his leg, well, first we fed him sick bay alcohol, little bottles of alcohol that we had, until we figured he was not feeling any pain at all. And then we were able to splint his leg, and it was 3 days later that we got him to an area where we could get him into the hospital. But a year and a half later, I wound up back in the hospital for 30 days with WWII. And he was in the hospital that I went to, Charlie Gann. Oh God, I haven't spoken that name in years. Charlie Gann. And he said that his leg had been broken 3 times and they were trying to fix it straight. But when he went over, after his foot went through the deck plate, that it really snapped it off pretty good. And, but our toilet was about as big as our kitchen. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Cold meat sandwiches. We had no way to cook hot meals.
Any more questions?
Back here.
Back here. I'll come
I
back.
don't need a mic.
Okay.
One comment, 3,000 gallons of avgas, pretty volatile stuff, because you were basically a floating bomb. Could you comment on that? Also, with all the bunks, were you hot bunking like on a larger vessel, or did you have your own bunks?
I didn't hear the end of that. What was the last one?
I said,
Let me come back so everybody can hear. Joe, go ahead.
Did you have to hot bunk on your vessel, like on a larger ship or on a submarine, or did you have your own bunks?
I still can't, there's too many echoes. There's too many, a whole lot of echoes.
Two comments.
Yeah,
You had 3,000 gallons of
aviation fuel.
so that's pretty volatile stuff. You were basically a floating bomb.
Yes.
Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, okay.
Also, the bunks that you had on the ship, were you hot bunking like on other vessels, or did you have your own bunks?
We had our own bunks. The 3,000 gallon of aviation fuel, like he said, was highly volatile. You could take, not in the beginning of the war, but later on, you could take a pistol or a rifle or one of the Japanese shells would pass right through because we developed self-sealed tanks. But if it was an incendiary round, you went off like a rocket. You stood no chance.
Should be over here.
Oh, our bunks. On our bunks. In the crew's quarters, we had room for 8. The snipes' quarters, which were aft, there was room for 4. The captain, well, not captain, usually a lieutenant or JG. There was 2 of them aboard. They each had their own little quarters that they slept in. They weren't very big, just about enough to put a bunk in.
We have a question back here. 1 second.
What was the monthly pay for a sailor back then?
Your monthly pay, how much did you get paid each month?
Too many echoes.
How much did you get paid?
How much did we get paid? $90 a month. And we received no hazardous pay, even though we were expendable.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question, and I'll relay it. Did you know Pete Knoble?
Yes,
Pete Knoble was on a PT boat.
I know that.
Yeah.
They had a huge plywood, a 4-bay sheet of plywood, painted with a PT boat on that. I tried to find out what happened to that after he died, and nobody over there seems to know.
I worked there. I'll see if I can find it.
Oh, I'd love to have that.
He was my surrogate father. Pete.
Yeah,
Pete. Knobles Grove's a big place.
yes,
Pete was on the PT boat.
Yes.
His kidneys went bad from the PT boat.
oh yeah.
So he peed on every square foot of Knobles Grove. Once he was in that PT boat.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, you got to watch out, get pee on your feet when you talk to him.
If you ever find that, give it to Jack Kraft for the museum.
I will tell you where it is. I remember that also.
Yes, that picture, it was a huge picture of PT boat.
Yeah, I'm glad you know him. He was wonderful to me.
Yep. Well, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to
I'll
meet you.
relay any questions.
All right, here's one. We often get the description or picture of the islands in the South Pacific as being very hot and humid. How about out on the boat? How would you describe it? Was it any colder, maybe at night? Well, what's the climate like when you're out at sea in the South Pacific?
South Pacific was very hot and humid. Was it the same thing on the boats?
Oh, yes. We didn't have air conditioning. Air conditioning wasn't known at that time.
But the nights were equally hot and humid.
But the nights were cooler or hot?
It didn't cool off very much. It was hot and humid.
Thank you for your talk this evening.
One more.
Back here.
Charlie, were you on a Higgins boat or an Elko?
Were you on a Higgins boat, or were you on a, I think it is a...
Elko.
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 Yes.
I was on the Higgins boat to begin with, and then the later boats came out, Elko, and they were a much better boat, and they were a drier boat. The Higgins and Huckins boats had a tendency in a little rough weather to get spray up over, where the Elko boats didn't do that.
Okay, thank you.
And the Elko boats were all 80 foot, except the early ones.
Were you transported, were the boats transported to the Pacific, or did they sail on their own power?
No, we could only go on 3,000 gallons of gasoline for 550 miles. We were loaded on bigger ships and transferred over to where our port of call was. They were unloaded, and then we got on the ships.
Okay, I have one more comment. We have a roller coaster at Knoebels, and it's called the Phoenix. The Phoenix is made from old growth Douglas fir that was treated. It was surplus from PT boats. It was destined to make PT boats.
Yeah.
That's why they cut the forest for the war effort. That roller coaster was built in 1948, and the wood today is as good today as it was in 1948. Or surplus. Same thing that you would have been on the boat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
But over in, after the war ended, they took 123 PT boats, took the motors and the armament off in the Solomon Islands and burned them. Because they're only made out of plywood and they're too expensive to bring back to the States. Some were given to Russia, some were taken into Japan, some were given to England and several other smaller countries.
Charlie,
I'm looking.
and back here, Joe. I want to make a comment. There's a very good film that was made by John Ford, starring Robert Montgomery and John Wayne. Ward Bond is in it, and a few other people that you know their faces, but you don't know their names. It's called They Were Expendable, and it's about PT boats in the South Pacific. It's an excellent film, and it's sometimes on Tour Classic Movies. So if you ever get a chance to see it, They Were Expendable. It's really good.
Right, yeah, there is this movie out, They Were Expendable, plus PT 109, which are two excellent films.
Excuse me, Chuck Klein, you have a question? Excuse me, you met Chuck. He was on the Higgins boat. You met him out in Mojave.
Little history about the Higgins boat and the PT boats. The plywood was the same on the Higgins boat as it was on, only they had more of it and layered on PT. But all Higgins was, they said that he actually was the #1 guy that won the war because he was able to put the troops on the beach quicker than any other country. And also the PT boats were able to keep them protected, keep the ships protected. But he had bought, and he had enough understanding that just before the war, he had a feeling that there was going to be a world war. And he literally bought up all the plywood in the Philippines that they had on that whole section of the island. And everybody thought he was crazy. What was he going to do with that? Well, he started building these Higgins boats and PT boats, and he had to sell them on the idea to the Navy and the Army. And then, of course, it turned out that he was claimed to be the #1 person to give us the victory in World War II.
Thank you, Chuck. Chuck spoke for us 2 years ago. He was the driver of the Higgins boats in, I think, 5 or 6 invasions on the Carthage command ship. Is that right? Yeah. And this is a fellow that you wanted to meet. Now you meet him. Now afterwards you're going to have to talk. And you actually were there when MacArthur walked in the water. Is that correct? Okay. We won't go into that here politically, but I remember you said that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming tonight. I'd like to get a round of applause.